The United Nations and the World Food Program are reporting that nearly 20 million people in Afghanistan are facing a serious crisis of hunger. It's a crisis primarily driven by the United States. To help unpack and explain this, we're fortunate to be joined now by Professor Shah Mehrabi. He's a professor of economics at Montgomery College and chair of the Central Bank of Afghanistan's Audit Committee, and also a member of the board of the Central Bank of Afghanistan. Professor Mehrabi, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm pleased to join you this morning.
And so there's been a lot of discussion in the media about this $7 billion in Afghan central bank reserves that the United States seized when the Taliban took over Kabul. But there hasn't been much by way of explanation of why the United States was able to seize that money or who they seized it from. And so you are one of the few members of the Afghanistan Central Bank, which had the money seized from it. So can you just explain to viewers what is the Afghanistan Central Bank? How did it get created?
Okay. Thank you very much again for inviting me. The Afghanistan Bank, which is the Central Bank of Afghanistan, was established as an independent institution. And that independent institution had the full autonomy to carry out its goal and responsibilities without interference and pressure from others. And this was in 2004, the DAB law, that is Afghanistan Bank DAB law, was established. And that DAB law, which still is in existence, clearly spells out that the primary objective of the central bank is to be able to track and manage money supply. And the whole purpose is to bring about stability in the prices, to make it easier for people to afford to buy basic necessities of life. And the basic objective of that law also is to provide enough liquidity. Now, people have very difficult time to get access to their deposits on the bank because the reserves have been seized or stolen by others, who says that, or confiscated, or whatever word you want to use, by the United States. And that has crippled the financial institution who are not able to carry out their responsibility. And one of the main responsibility is to bring stability in the prices, and also to be able to eliminate volatility in exchange rate. And it's very critical here. I think and a lot of people need to understand the fact that the objective in this case of the central bank is to bring price stability. And to be able to do that, then the central bank needs to engage in foreign exchange auctions. And how do you do a foreign exchange auction when you don't have access to their own reserve? And that is United States dollars in the form of foreign exchange reserve that are at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that were deposited by the central bank because the United States offered safety and also high rate of return. Now, those exchange rate has got high effect on inflation rate in Afghanistan. In case the domestic currency loses its value against United States dollars, then what happens to the prices? Prices of import goods rise. And that is what you see clearly going on now in the economy. We have double-digit inflation, as well as we have double-digit increase in exchange rate, as I had clearly predicted back in September of 2021. We have the clear data now that shows that in both of those areas, and I'll be happy to share that as well.
So the counter argument is obviously devastating for the people of Afghanistan. The obvious counter argument that people in the States say is if you release the funds, it goes into the hands of the Taliban and funds nefarious activities on the part of the Taliban. What's your response to that very common argument that gets thrown around in this debate? Why is that wrong, basically?
Okay, this is the first point that needs to be brought up. I think, and the public needs to know that these reserves are reserves that belong to Afghan people. And Afghan people established an independent entity, it's called Central Bank, and they entrusted this institution based on the law, that was the central bank law, vested the management and maintenance of these reserves on this Central Bank of Afghanistan for the purpose of safeguarding the value of the international value of Afghani vis-a-vis that of dollar in Europe, and also to be able to maintain confidence in Afghanistan money and exchange rate policy. Now, President Biden obviously split those in two, and then I will come to that later on. But now the important point here that I brought up a minute ago is that one has to understand that the central bank is independent entity, and it still follow the laws and the laws that were established during the prior regime. And also the highest policy making body of the central bank is the Supreme Council. That is the board, what it's called, because the central bank is very similar in its structure to that of Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. It has governors, and the governors make the policies. There has not been any interference by Taliban whatsoever in the affair that I conduct as a chair of the audit committee or in the policy making of that particular entity. So to argue that indeed the Taliban, all you have to do is look at evidence. What has happened to the reserve that we left in the hands of Taliban when Taliban took over on August 15? Those reserves were managed very well. And also, there have been more reserves that have been accumulated in the past 9 months. They have been used for the purpose of auctioning off on a limited basis in order to bring price stability and eliminate volatility in exchange rate. So look at the evidence. Right. And also what I had suggested to build a trust building mechanism, I had suggested back in September, allow a monitored access to unlimited basis of $150 million to be used exclusively for auctioning purposes.
Right.
And if you see there's any misuse of that, then cut the funds.
That's what I wanted to ask. That's what I wanted to ask you about, because so you could say the central bank currently has assets. The Taliban has not interfered with the way that the central bank is dispersing the assets to meet its mandate of price control. But let's say that politicians in the United States are worried, well, what if we release a lot of this money and the Taliban changes its tune and starts interfering? What mechanisms do you have as a central banker to be able to report back and to monitor? And then what could the United States do if it felt like its money was being misused by the Taliban?
Okay. The first, I want to make sure that we understand that this money is not United States money.
Yes. I agree with you on that, but the people here in the United States feel like it is their money, even though it's not.
Afghans have accumulated all this money over the past 20 years, and they have deposited. The only thing is they deposited in the United States and some of it in Europe. Obviously, 2.1 billion is in Europe, and that will have to be also released. And they are not releasing it because of the fear of Treasury in the United States. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying, the best way to give guarantee, what I have suggested is that limited monetary release of these reserves. Why not come up with a trust building mechanism between the current government in the United States? I had suggested $150 million per month. It could be less to pay for import. And now a specific use of these reserves could be used for what I have said for auction purposes, in order to prop up the value of Afghani. The reason here is to stabilize prices, to help meet the needs of ordinary Afghans who cannot afford to buy bread, who cannot afford to pay for cooking oil, they cannot afford to go ahead and pay for fuel. So the whole idea is also that this can be independently verified by auditing firm, and can be terminated in the event of misuse. And I think this is a guarantee, because again, I reiterate this point that these reserves belong to Afghan people. It is managed, controlled, and invested by the Central Bank of Afghanistan. And the objective is to provide liquidity so that they can be readily available to pay for imports and to reduce volatility and so on, and to reduce the depreciation of Afghani, which creates higher prices that makes it very difficult for poor people who are very desperate to be able to get a piece of bread, and there are long lines are formed at a bakery store, people begging to be able to have naan, which is a basic staple, to be able to have at least a piece of that particular bread to be able to survive. So it's in one way or another a cruel punishment by others to be able to seize the funds that belong to the ordinary Afghans and to be managed as Afghans have decided through the central bank, which is an independent entity.
Yeah, and we've covered this pretty heavily on this program, but my sense is that the American people, and it seems like also perhaps the American government has basically no understanding, or they pretend that they have no understanding of what's going on here. So I just want to underline it one more time here. It is as if a foreign government seized all of the assets of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The U.S. Federal Reserve in the United States here is responsible for price stability. Fed right now is concerned about inflation, and so they're using their reserves and they're using their interest rate policy in order to try to tamp down inflation. If the Federal Reserve can no longer operate, then you just get kind of just a runaway crisis the way that you get in Afghanistan. And one reason it feels like the American government doesn't understand what's going on here, or pretends not to understand, is that the Biden administration is saying that it's going to take half of this money, it's going to steal half of it, the other half it's going to use, quote, to the benefit of the Afghan people. Now, that has been interpreted a couple of different ways. Some people thought that meant it would be humanitarian aid. It would be funneled to, say, the World Food Program or the UN, and would be used to kind of purchase food for people who are hungry and then give it to those people. That is the opposite of what that is not what the central bank's role is. The central bank's role is to get the economy going, to get banks open, to create a situation where people can actually get paid for going to work, and where people can depend on consistent prices over time. And so what is you meet with Treasury occasionally. What is your understanding of whether or not the White House understands this situation and is just acting in a reckless way, or simply doesn't understanding it? And what is your understanding of what is taking so long to get this money released?
I think there's a political reasons for why there's been that these reserves have not been released expeditiously, and it's not only the USD, United States dollars, that exist in the form of reserve, the Federal Reserve Bank, but also Afghani banknotes. Afghani banknotes also have not been released because that again, the United States initially did not give a comfort letter to Poland printing company to release Afghani banknotes. That still have not been released. While Treasury has facilitated that is comfort letter, then there's been logistic problem, one, and then also since there is no corresponding bank here, the Central Bank of Afghanistan cannot go ahead and transfer money to any other entity outside Afghanistan to be able to meet its debt or other obligation. So the Treasury definitely understand it. This is a political decision that was made by President Biden. And President Biden obviously decided that he is going to split the funds into 3.5 billion to be used for what is called, quote unquote, for the benefits of Afghan people. And then the other 3.5 to be set aside for September 11 plaintiff to be litigated in the court. Now, this policy, really, I've argued, it's designed to decapitalize the central bank and to dismantle it. It's very simple overall. And I think I have argued also the whole policy of allowing a plaintiff of September 11, I strongly believe they can be compensated, but they could be compensated through other means rather than spending Afghanistan reserve. I think we spent now in the last 2 months, $53 billion for Ukraine purposes. There are ways that we could also facilitate this or come up with an expenditure for the purpose of settling the 9/11 plaintiff. But I think to take away the 2.5 billion out of our 7 billion allocation is, as I would say, is totally unjustified, and there's no economic reasoning for how that split came into being, except the fact that it was a politically comfortable decision for President Biden and the Treasury to go ahead and come up with this particular arrangement.
Great. Well, Dr. Mehrabi, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure this one's going to end strategically the way our government thinks it is.
No, just a disaster waiting to happen. And a disaster unfolding as we speak for no reason except spite. My take anyway. We'll have more Rising right after this.